Greetings friends, my name is Pavel Stelmach and I'm glad to present for you the new episode of our daily wrap-up series. The 10th meeting in the Ramstein format took place yesterday. At the online meeting, the defense ministers discussed further cooperation and assistance to Ukrainian military in repelling the Russian onslaught.
Ramstein 10 inspires optimism, strengthening air defense, ammo supplies, trainings and forming an armored fist. Thank you to Secretary of Defense for your outstanding leadership and to friends from the anti-Kremlin coalition for your willingness to stand with Ukraine until our victory. Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, on Twitter.
Let me remind you that the anti-Kremlin coalition already includes 54 countries. The 10th coalition is also expanding. According to Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin, 9 countries have already pledged to provide Ukraine with more than 150 Leopard tanks. However, the meeting of Ramstein began with Austin's report about the US drone that Russia shot down over the Black Sea. As Austin noted, this episode fits into a general pattern of aggressive, risky and dangerous actions by Russian pilots in international airspace. He also emphasized that the US aviation will continue to fly wherever it is allowed by international law. Already after the meeting, Lloyd spoke with the Defense Minister of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, which Kremlin propagandists are already talking about. There was no official information, so they can speak about anything. And about the fact that this will happen to any American drone, and about the fact that now the USA will not help Ukraine. But we hope that everything will be exactly the opposite. Now the Pentagon and our allies will provide more help, because as we have seen from history, if the Kremlin is not stopped by force, it will only become more aggressive.
Each new package of assistance to Ukraine from the allies is a signal to Putin. Ukraine and the world are probing which weapons will stop the aggressor, and if there is no constructive action from the Kremlin, the partners talk about new weapons and ammunition for them. It is important to understand that all arms negotiations are a time-consuming process that requires compliance with the rules and silence so as not to be discredited by the Russian Federation.
However, despite the general silence, several of our partners officially announced their continued support for our country. Spain will deliver 6 more Leopard 2A4 tanks in the near future, to which a second batch of 4 other units will be added later. Sweden will transfer 10 Leopard tanks and key components of air defense equipment to Ukraine. Norway will transfer 2 NASAMS systems. According to the results of Ramstein, Canada transfers artillery and anti-aircraft ammunition to Ukraine. In particular, 8,000 ammunition, missiles for air defense and ammunition for Leopard 1 tanks will be provided. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that NATO countries are ready to provide Ukraine with more air defense, armored vehicles and ammunition. And the countries of the European Union plan to increase the production of 155mm shells and speed up the transfer of ammunition to Ukraine from the already available stocks. This was announced by the EU Commissioner for Financial Services, Financial Stability and Capital Markets, Mairead McGuinness.
The Commission is ready to mobilize its regulatory clout and the available resources as appropriate to support the defense industry to ramp up. We are working on all options, including mobilizing the EU budget if needed. More specifically, we recently put on the table the European Defense Industry Reinforcement Common Procurement Act. This short-term instrument with 500 million euros could be used to accelerate industrial production of the required ammunition. The support of the Parliament to reach a swift agreement will be essential. If necessary, we are also ready to mobilize other resources. Mairead McGuinness, European Commissioner for Financial Stability, Financial Services and the Capital Markets Union.
And such news cannot but please us, as well as the fact that in the USA they understand that support for Ukraine is important. It is important not only for our country or for the United States, but also for the whole world. And these are not my only words, but the head of the Pentagon, Lloyd Austin.
This is about the rules-based international order. It's about one country's ability to wake up one day and change the borders of its neighbor and annex its neighbor's sovereign territory. Lloyd Austin, United States Secretary of Defense.
I will remind you that at the previous meeting in the Ramstein format, the Allies promised that they would help Ukraine go on the counteroffensive in the spring. The possibility of supplying combat aircraft was also discussed. A number of partners reported their readiness to train Ukrainian pilots. On March 16, 2022, Russian troops committed one of the biggest war crimes. They dropped an aerial bomb on the Mariupol drama theater, in the basements of which civilians were hiding. The exact number of victims of this strike is now very difficult to calculate, because after the capture of Mariupol, the occupiers began to pour concrete over the places of their crimes, destroying the evidence. However, all the guilty will be punished because the mechanism for bringing the Russians to justice are being approved. 32 countries are working on legal details, and I am sure that the military and political leadership and the perpetrators of such crimes will be on trial. Then, a year ago, there were mostly elderly people, women and children in the basement of the Mariupol theater, and many of them didn't survive after a direct hit by an aerial bomb. And those who survived are now subject to other atrocities. Forced deportation. Therefore, Ukraine calls on the protection and return of illegally deported Ukrainian children to Russia. Russian occupation authorities continue their forcible transfer and adoption of Ukrainian children. Russia is carrying out probably the world's largest child abduction operation in modern history. More than 16,000 Ukrainian children have already been deported. Many of them were unlawfully handed over to Russian families for adoption, sent to re-education camps because victims of child trafficking and sexual violence, ending up in the most remote areas of Russia. Russia follows scenarios from its genocide playbook, deporting children after their parents were murdered, abducting directly from the family, separating families in filtration camps, displacing Ukrainian educational institutions in full stock, and creating unbearable conditions for life. Forcible transfer of children falls under the definition of genocide per the Genocide Convention. The Russian government is currently involved in this crime at all levels. Stolen Ukrainian children require immediate protection and must return home. Russia's crimes must be prosecuted by international law, and all those involved must be brought to justice. Russia seeks to deprive Ukraine of its future. Deportation, re-education, and forcible adoption are key elements of Kremlin's systematic efforts to deny the existence of Ukrainian identity, history, and culture.
The enemy also resorts to gross deception of gullible people. The occupiers offer children rest or sanatorium treatment in the Russian Federation. Some gullible parents even give written consent. And then they have problems. Some of them cannot find their children. Some are forced to go to Russia for their children, but cannot leave from there. Irina Vereshchuk, Minister for Reintegration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine, on the Ukrainian telethon.
Let me remind you that in May 2022, Putin signed a decree on a simplified procedure for obtaining Russian citizenship for children from Donbas, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. And this is a continuation of the policy of destroying the Ukrainian nation. After all, on the territory of Russia, Ukrainian children are taught a distorted history, planted with propaganda, and do everything to make them consider themselves Russians. As of the end of February, the deportation of more than 16,000 children was confirmed. We managed to return 307 of them. To do more, the help of international community is needed. Next, I want to talk about what will happen to Ukrainian children if they are not rescued from Russian captivity. Here are the shots from the occupied Crimea. Yes, these are children who are just about to go to school, but are already learning to disassemble and assemble a machine gun. They don't play games, learn programming, robotics, or develop their creative skills. No, they learn to fight from childhood. And the one who is older, that one can go to the military youth club, for example, on the basis of the PMC Wagner Center in St. Petersburg. At the beginning of 2023, the Wagnerenok Youth Club was launched. Deputies and security officials come to meetings with children, and in their free time, participants are offered to play a military drone simulator. The creators intend to instill in school children and students love for their motherland. The Wagnerenok Youth Club published its first post on the Russian social network ВКонтакте in February. As the description of the group says, this is a single platform for the development of young people. working with the support of the Wagner PMC Center Business Center. The target audience of the group, as the organizers specified, is children from 16 to 25 years old. During the months of the existence of Wagnerenok, it was visited by deputies of the State Duma. In addition to its own youth wing, the Wagner Center intends to raise its own military correspondents. Among the services offered by the Wagner PMC is the training of war correspondents, who, judging by the story of one of their students, should be taught to work on the front lines. Judging by a survey conducted in St. Petersburg, parents and grandparents are generally not against the militarization of schools and introducing children to weapons.
So if they would go to the front like now and not know how, I think it's better to know, because you still have to fight, and further forward, and today, and tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and in 100 years, and in 200, and 300.
I think it probably should, yes, because I was afraid that my grandson would be 18 and I was worried about everything. I thought, what if they take him into the army? God forbid, they still don't know anything at all.
Prigozhin himself has never publicly spoken about Wagnerenok. However, the PMC Wagner Center community in Vkontakte has already talked about the meetings of the youth club several times, however, without mentioning its name. But you know, even now, Wagner Group mercenaries go to Russian schools and advertise contract service in this structure. This is the kind of future offered to children in Russia. It is not universities and higher education that are promoted, but military service and contract service. And at the same time, Putin declared war in order to demilitarize Ukraine. So maybe Russians should look at what is happening in their own country and not attack the neighboring one. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for future videos. Goodbye.